First of all, thank you very much, Professor Takara, for inviting UNESCO and myself to be here. It's my great pleasure. My second time in beautiful Japan. This time I brought my wife with me. For her, it's the first time in Japan. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much. And also thank you for Kyoto University to invite UNESCO. I will speak for about 25-30 minutes about something that relates to the SDGs and to human survivability, mainly based on the program that I'm responsible for in the UNESCO office in Bangkok, because UNESCO has such a broad program talking about everything that we are doing. I'm sure that the colleague from the FAO can confirm this. In the United Nations specialized agencies, we are just doing so tremendously much. It would be too much to talk about all of this. Yes, the first slide here, and please forgive me, I don't have many slides from Japan yet, because it's only my second time to Japan. The first time I came here was in 1990, 29 years ago. I visited Yokohama and Tokyo and Mount Fuji. So my specialization really is from the Arab region. So many of the pictures I'm showing you are from the Arab region, but nevertheless, they symbolize human survivability. Here it's a picture from the Emirate of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. In the foreground, you can see coastal salt marshes. That's how all of this looked like about 25, 30 years ago. In the middle, you've got mangroves. These mangroves are man-made mangroves. They are planted mangroves, and it shows us how blue carbon systems can also be planted by men to have biomass production or to sequestrate carbon from the atmosphere. And then, of course, in the background, you see the new mega city of Dubai with the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. Yes, we had massive terrestrial, coastal, and marine ecosystem changes in the world between the 1970s and now. Of course, they were already there before, but especially between the 1970s. I hope I pressed the right button now to come to the next slide. So I selected this slide, which is again from the Arab region, but it doesn't matter. This is from Al-Wakra, a tiny little city in Qatar. We have so many anthropogenic impacts caused since the 1970s that we really need to ask ourselves some very serious questions, reflecting the theme of the symposium, human survivability. Do we want to take the risk of getting shipwrecked? We have serious environmental challenges, and this is nothing new. And now we are in the year 2019, and we have the SDGs since 2015. I will show you in the presentation here that this is nothing new. And down at the bottom of the picture, you can already see that the UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves, which are abbreviated as BR, that came already into the thinking of some foresight people in the late 1960s. UNESCO at that time already warned against the unbridled exploitation of natural resources. That's why these people then suggested to establish the World Network of Biosphere Reserves, which are sites for sustainable human living or for the reconciliation of nature conservation and sustainable development. The network came alive in 1971. It's not that well known, but it's becoming more and more known. It has core areas for nature conservation, and it has buffer zones and transition zones for human living. I think it's the best system that we have among the 5 systems in the United Nations system for nature conservation. The second oldest system is the UNESCO World Heritage Convention with the World Heritage Sites. They are natural heritage sites and cultural heritage sites that exist since 1972. That is also the same year in which the United Nations Environment Programme was built for the same reasons. Then, of course, we have the global geoparks at UNESCO since recently. So there's 3 site systems at UNESCO. But we also have the Ramsar Convention for wetlands based in Gland in Switzerland. And of course, the colleague from the FAO, he knows that we have the globally important agricultural heritage sites which are hosted by the Food and Agricultural Organization. So already since such a long time we are thinking about human survivability. Let me remind all of us on something very, very simple. It's the 3-3-3 rule. Human life will cease, or we will die, if we don't have enough oxygen to breathe for 3 minutes, if we don't have water available for 3 days, depending on which ecosystems we are, or 3 weeks without food. This is again a picture from the Arab region, from the state of Qatar. It's a coastal environmental area called Khor al-Udeid. And it really shows us, if we don't take care of our planet, if we devastate or desertify our planet, it'll look like this. This is a coastal area called Khor al-Udeid, and it's a picture that I took in 2007 after the tropical cyclone Gonu traveled over the Indian Ocean and hit Oman, and it pushed a lot of water into the Persian Gulf, so that the sea level rose by above 2 meters above high tide level. A very unusual event. But then the tropical cyclone Gonu was possibly caused by seawater warming in the Indian Ocean. Now, seawater warming, of course, we don't know how much is natural warming and how much is anthropogenic warming. Yes, World Environment Day 2019 had the theme Beat Air Pollution. Of course, this has to do with air pollution because all the fossil fuel that we release by burning it and other greenhouse gas is contributing to sea level rise. So we need to ask ourselves the question, since we don't have any place to escape from this planet, I mean, there might be other planets where human life is possible, except for we don't know them, neither would we know how to reach them. So we have to treat our planet with the greatest care and respect. And seriously, I don't think that we do that, and I'm quite sure that all of you in this room agree. So 67% of our planet, we can't live in it because it's oceans. Of course, there are some countries which are building now artificial islands. Either they're dumping them into the oceans or they make them afloat. China is one of them, United Arab Emirates is another one of them, French Polynesia is another one of them. And so we are getting there slowly, that we actually can live either in the oceans or on top of the oceans or maybe below the ocean surface. Question remains, do we treat our ecosystem, Earth, good enough? We can already have natural events that are quite dangerous, such as meteorite impacts, natural climate change, earthquakes, forest fires, floods, droughts, volcanic events, etc. And there's a lot of talk about disaster risk reduction. So we can prepare ourselves for what to do before such events, how to predict them, what to do during the events, and how to fix up after the events. But we don't have much of an impact of whether these events happen or not. But then, of course, we've got the anthropogenic impacts, and that includes the vast production of desalination plants around the coastlines of the world, in particular around the Arabian Peninsula. We have vast airports, harbors, highways, trucks, cars, food import, mega cities. Here in Japan, of course, we've got Tokyo, Yokohama, one of the mega cities. But even Riyadh, capital of Saudi Arabia, has become a megacity. It's 10 million people, and all of them depend on seawater desalination that is being pumped from the Persian Gulf upstream against gravity, causing huge outputs of carbons into the atmosphere. And then, of course, we've got nuclear disasters, either intentional nuclear disasters or accidental nuclear disasters. After Chernobyl happened in Russia, Mr. Fedor here is from Russia. He told me at that time, it was, of course, Soviet Union, people warned against nuclear disasters, accidental disasters, including my country. I'm from Germany. But people said, oh, this is just Soviet technology, which was considered inferior at that time by some people, which was, of course, quite an arrogant behavior. Then Fukushima happened here in Japan. So we really have to be very careful with nuclear disasters. So we have choices that we can make for these anthropogenic impacts, and I think that's what we are discussing here today in this symposium. Just to talk about Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific, in terms of UNESCO, we have 45 member states. Of the 193 member states that we have as an intergovernmental organization, 45 of them are located in Asia Pacific. But Asia is a clear geographical term, and so is Pacific. In it, we have 63 countries. It stretches from the Bosporus, from the Ural Mountains, including the entire Arabian Peninsula, all the way to the coastline of Alaska, Canada, down to Chile. That's what I call Asia Pacific. So it's a very, very vast area. It's the largest area in the world. It contains about 4.5 billion people, and it has very, very diverse and different countries, like highly developed Japan or Singapore. But then we have these countries with very vast populations like China, India, Indonesia. I met two Indonesian colleagues only this morning. They confirmed that Indonesia has now 260, 280 million people in it. And then we have the small island developing states here in the right side of this picture, like Samoa and Fiji. And we have dry desert places like Pakistan, for example, which has also 200 million people in it, even though it's much smaller geographically in comparison to Indonesia. And we've got Saudi Arabia, which doesn't even have 30 million people living in it, but it's a vast country, dry desert, in comparison to the other tropical areas. So we have a huge diversity of cultural, societal, economic, and ecological situations in it. Let me talk a little bit about biodiversity. In the program in Bangkok, we focus on the establishment of new biosphere reserves and global geoparks. The main focus is on plastic pollution, which has been celebrated by our colleagues in the United Nations Environment Programme together with UNESCO and actually all UN agencies in 2018, and with all member states of the United Nations. World Environment Day 2018 was suggested by the Republic of India, and the theme was Beat the Plastic Pollution. So I'm taking that very serious. I'm working in plastic pollution since about 15 years, even though I cannot say that I'm a plastic specialist, but somebody needs to do something about it. We have also a theme called UNESCO Green Academies. That's about environmentally friendly buildings, in particular about educational institutes such as kindergartens and schools and colleges and universities. And we are focusing on a number of important publications, and you are all invited to participate in these publications. I'll come to that in a minute. This is a picture from the Kingdom of Bahrain. It shows the sea, the sky, and the sands and some biodiversity in it. So it's basically a picture comprising ecosystems. What is missing is human beings, but believe me, people have been living in this harsh environment since hundreds of years. So biodiversity in the past, we mainly considered species with that term, but now we consider whole ecosystems, communities, species, and genes. And this biodiversity provides for us ecosystem services, including food, water, energy, recreation, transport, biotechnology, outdoor education, blue carbon ecosystems that comprises mainly mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses, maybe coral reefs can also be included to a certain degree, and natural heritage. Here we have a salt marsh, again in Bahrain, with flamingos feeding in the background. So if we talk about adverse environmental impacts, we normally look at them individually, like we look into an oil spill, we look into a nuclear disaster, we look into climate change, we look into plastic pollution. But I do not believe that there is a single university in the world that had yet begun serious studies on the cumulative impact. If we put all these adverse environmental impacts together, what is the impact of that? How much did we already damage our ecosystem called planet Earth? We do not really know. So I hope that can inspire some of you. And again, my congratulations to the students among you who have organized this seminar. We need to know what are the cumulative impacts. We don't. I don't think that there's anybody who does. I don't think that we even know the impact of plastic pollution alone. There was a lot of talk about climate, of course. Now the 25th climate COP is coming up. A lot of congratulations, self-congratulation after the climate COP in Paris. Now the US, they just said that they are leaving the climate Paris agreement. In the same time, we have to be a little bit critical. I mean, these climate summits, 25 times that took place, 40,000 people are traveling there, putting a lot of carbon into the air in order to discuss how to put less carbon into the air. And it costs $100 million each. So even my organization likes these climate summits very much. I'm also in favor of them. I think it would be good enough if 400 or 4,000 people would travel there rather than 40,000 people. And the costs could be invested into grassroots projects to actually fix the problems that we already have. Scientists are warning since years against the unbridled exploitation of natural resources. It's about time to listen to them. That means to us, because we are all scientists and environmental managers in a way, so we can keep the human life support system intact. Imagine sea level rise, which is a reality. And again, we don't know how much of it is caused by natural climate change, and we don't know how much is caused by anthropogenic climate change, but we do know it's happening. Imagine you are based in Vietnam or you are based in Egypt. In Egypt, we've got the Nile Delta coming from the highlands of Eritrea and Ethiopia and coming from the Nile of Uganda, downstream through Sudan into where it then the Blue Nile and the White Nile come together. It forms then the Nile and it discharges into the Nile Delta. A highly productive agricultural site in the world. Sea level will make the Mediterranean Sea rise. The saline water will intrude the Nile Delta, and all the crops are not salt tolerant, so production will inevitably go down. Even worse, it is happening in Vietnam, with the Mekong coming down from China through Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and then it goes into Vietnam. It discharges into the sea. It's a rice production area, and it's only 40 centimeters above the high tide mark. So imagine 40 centimeter sea level rise. Imagine full moon situations with high tides and then offshore winds. It'll blow the sea right into the Mekong Delta and cause the rice crops there to be exposed to the salt. Rice is not a salt-tolerant crop. It is very sensitive, even though the Chinese Academy of Science is trying to develop salt-tolerant rice. But imagine the Mekong Delta will be inundated by seawater. It will be a complete disaster. And it will not be only noticed in Vietnam, it will be noticed by all the countries that are dependent on rice import. Of course, we have the seagrass species. They are also producing, they're flowering plants. They're producing starch-based seeds. Maybe we can develop seagrasses into crops that are then entirely saltwater tolerant, seawater tolerant. There are not many studies going into that, but the Mohammed Ajmal Khan Institute for Sustainable Halophyte Utilization in Karachi, they are researching that. The International Center for Biosaline Agriculture in Dubai, they are conducting research into it. And here in Japan, it's the University of the Ryukyus. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. They have the International Society of Mangrove Ecosystems, spearheaded by Professor Shigeyuki Baba. So seawater utilization, we have 67% of the planet covered in seawater. We have very limited knowledge on utilizing that. Only 3% of the water that we have available is fresh water, and most of that is still locked up as ice in the Antarctic, in the Arctic, and in the glaciers. The SDGs, as Professor Takara already mentioned, there are 17 of them. Just for those of you who have not familiarized themselves yet that much with them, it is not so that they are prioritized. They're not in priority order. 1 is not more important than 17. They are all of equal importance. 17 is as important as 1. 2 is as important as number 16, and so on. And they are all interconnected. And they are indeed all connected to human survivability. And they are expressing our hopes and challenges that we have. And they are, as a matter of fact, not new. They came into life in 2015. However, before the SDGs, we had the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. A little bit of a clumsy term calling them Millennium Development. They called them because it was the beginning of the millennium. But of course, the millennium lasts 1,000 years, not just 15 years. So the SDGs, what I like about them a lot is they are very well structured. They are very clearly formulated. You can open these websites and then you can find easily the targets. And it is not so that all the targets should be achieved until 2030. Some of the targets should already be achieved until 2025. And other targets should already be achieved until 2020, which is just 2 months from now. Yeah. Then the MDGs, as a matter of fact, there was a precursor for them as well. It was the Stockholm Conference in 1972 in Sweden. And it was the Stockholm Declaration from 1972, which had which was very similarly formulated to the SDGs from today. Some conclusions in the middle of the presentation. We have substantial socio-ecological change going on in the world. Of course, we cannot just prescribe nature conservation as a solution, because we also need to consider our needs. And we have plenty of needs, and we are 7.75 billion people in the world. In comparison to the 1970s, by the way, when UNEP was formed and when the biosphere reserves came into life, we were only 3.2 billion people. So when I was born, it was 1963, we were about 2.7, 2.8 billion people. Now we are 7.8, approaching 8. According to some estimates and calculations, our planet has a carrying capacity of about 12 billion people. But that would require for the goods to be distributed equally. And that is, of course, not the case. We have high-income countries, we've got low-income countries, and we've got high-income people and low-income people. So this change has already caused significant adverse environmental impacts. And this is not in the best interest of humanity. So we need to ask ourselves the question, what should we do? We have options for coordinated interventions. We can conduct ecosystem assessment. That means to assess ecosystems and redress the damage and loss of habitats. Not just to stop it, also to fix it, to redress it. We can establish nature reserves, keep habitats intact and protected, including UNESCO Biosphere Reserves, heritage sites, geoparks, or also the FAO, globally important agricultural heritage sites that I mentioned. Very important sites, by the way, where we are conserving ancient traditional landform methods. We can restore damaged habitats, including undesired trends. Therefore, we need to study and know the trends. Therefore, we need good scientific monitoring systems in the air, in the sea, in the rivers, in the cities, in agricultural places, and in nature. We can conduct and document scientific long-term research projects to reinforce our knowledge. And we can involve the general public via studies or in museums, where we can encourage, in particular, children to become scientists and to get engaged into our work. We can develop and implement biogeophysical monitoring systems, including with the United Nations agencies and including with regional bodies and with neighboring countries. We cannot look at it as one nation alone or as one city alone. We need to conduct these studies together with our neighbors. We can reinforce the overall management capacities by educating new socio-environmental managers, for example, students that can then become politicians and journalists. I mean, we have some fantastic politicians and journalists in the world, but we've got also some people who are exactly the opposite. They just don't know what they're talking about, causing a lot of damage by black painting or whitewashing or by just ignoring the problems and hoping that they will somehow go away, like climate change. Climate change is a reality, and believe me, there are politicians, they deny it or they think, oh, it will go away somehow. We can put in place and reinforce well-functioning research agencies, authorities, and implement national action plans, including international conventions, and support achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. What are the issues? So the picture in the background here could basically be in any country in the world. Could be Japan, could be Ethiopia, could be Germany, could be anywhere. We have a huge load of plastic by using these plastic bottles, for example. It's very convenient. We are all doing it, just as we are all using fossil fuel for our transport, for example, or for our cooling and heating. So the issues are urban encroachment into natural ecosystems, prevent and reduce pollution of all kinds, not just plastic pollution, overfishing, harmful algal blooms, thermal pollution, lack of scientific research and monitoring capacities, lack of understanding, ongoing dependency on imported research and management personnel in many places. Not every country like Japan has such fantastic universities available and so many researchers. Some countries are really struggling and they need to bring people from other places to assist them. Lack of awareness, and there's a highly important need to revert to transboundary cooperation. I've just been informed that I should speed up a little bit. We have, this is a picture from Vietnam here, a mangrove that has been damaged by converting it into shrimp farms. We need to protect these blue carbon ecosystems because they store a lot of carbon in the soil. And it is believed that they store as much carbon in the soil like all terrestrial plant vegetation cover together. We need to have better fishing practices, not only in Japan, but also in Denmark and in Spain, and also better fishing laws so that we don't have conflicts over it because our oceans are already overfished. We need to prevent pollution of all kinds. In UNESCO, the left poster, it shows you the plastic initiative that we have launched recently. I will give you some information about it. Please visit the website theplasticinitiative.org. You can participate in an online survey. You can see a short film, and you can also give us statements. It's only 18 months old, but it will grow in time, and a lot of people will participate in it. We need scientific documentation, protecting the marine environment, for example. We have developed a system for called Green Academies, based on these 4 pillars. I can make guidelines available to you. We basically have installed tanks like this for rainwater collection in schools. We are converting black water and grey water in biogas digesters, which then produce CH4 methane gas, which can be used for cooking in the schools. The water can be used for school gardens. We need exchange programs between young scientists. Here we have the United Arab Emirates and Ethiopia. We have an exchange between them, which was highly successful. I'm almost coming to an end, Mr. Chairman. Lack of understanding of the need for scientific research and monitoring. We need to guarantee political will and support. As an example, I mentioned that before, Dubai established mangroves in the creek. This in turn attracted flamingos. This is now a Ramsar site. Floating mangroves in Qatar. This is my final slide now. We need to revert to transboundary cooperation and turn to action from rhetoric. That includes the UN systems, but it includes all governments. We've talked enough. We need to turn to action. And arigato gozaimasu. Thank you very much for your attention.
The 3 rules was really impressive to face our current situation. Is there anyone who has question about his presentation?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving us a very nice presentation. We have learned many things from your presentation. And I have a short question for you. you mentioned about cumulative effect of plastic pollution and nuclear disasters and climate change due to CO2 emission from fossil fuel. So, but I don't find any example. So, could you give us a concrete or illustrative example about the cumulative effect among three factors?
Thank you very much for the question. The question is to provide concrete examples of studies that have actually conducted cumulative effects of environmental impacts. What I said in my presentation is that we really don't know, and that I'm not aware of any studies that have been carried out. What I would suggest to university faculties of physical geography, biology, zoology, environmental management, etc., or this faculty here, I would suggest that such studies should be carried out. If we look into areas with very dense human population, if we take, for example, the Persian Gulf between Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Oman, it's a very shallow embayment system, and it's the highest accumulation of desalination plants in the world. At the same time, all the coastal areas have been converted from natural ecosystems into man-made ecosystems entirely. Very few exceptions. Islands have been built, coral reefs have disappeared due to sedimentation processes, and there is a lot of talk of establishing nuclear power plants, which will then each of them put cooling water of the volume of the River Thames into the Persian Gulf, and the cooling water will be 4 degrees higher than the ambient temperature. So if you put all of these things together, plastic and cooling water discharge and converting natural ecosystems into man-made ecosystems, what is the impact of that? What does that mean to us? Again, thank you for your question. I don't think that these studies have been carried out, but I believe, and this does not come from me, this comes from the scientific community, from some scientists with foresight, these studies should be carried out. We cannot just say, what is climate change causing to us? What is plastic pollution causing? What is all of this together? What does all of this together mean? So university professors should encourage the MSc and PhD candidates to carry out some very, very serious in-depth studies and document that, because we don't know.
So you mentioned the role that students and governments can play in reducing emissions, but I was wondering, what role do you think corporations should be playing in this as well?
What role?
Do you think corporations should be
The
playing?
private sector.
Yes.
Well, the private sector has become so powerful planet-wide, worldwide. As a matter of fact, the private sector in many, many cases is more powerful than governments. Especially they have more money than governments. So the private sector has an undoubted, very significant role to play. What I'm doing, for example, at UNESCO Bangkok office, I'm working with the private sector. I invite them, I reach out to them. As a matter of fact, only a few days ago, I have written request letter to provide funding to UNESCO for the plastic initiative. And I targeted 12 oil companies in the world, major oil companies in the US, in China, in France, in Netherlands, in Britain, in the United Arab Emirates, and in Qatar. I reached out to them and I've written letters to them asking them not to make donations, to become partners. Because these oil companies and these corporations, they have environment departments, they've got fine environmental specialists in them. And of course, they also want to keep our planet intact and our ecosystems. So hopefully 1 or 2 of them will come back with a positive response. We don't know, but they do have a very clear responsibility. I have also reached out not only to the oil companies, I also reached out to 2 major aeroplane manufacturers. One of those planes I came with from Bangkok to Kyoto only yesterday. Hopefully they will also take up their responsibility. And the same is with the car industry, with the shipping industry, with the transport industry, the tourism industry. they are all causing carbon emissions going into the atmosphere. Together with us, you and I, we're also causing carbon going into the air. So yes, they have a responsibility. We invite them to come in, and in the United Nations, and that includes every single UN agency, we are encouraging the private sector to participate, and we actually acknowledge and appreciate that we cannot achieve the SDGs without the significant and substantial participation of the private sector. So they are all encouraged to work with us. They can work through the transparent platforms of the UN agencies. You have two of the agencies here today, with my colleague from the FAO and myself from UNESCO, and this is of course a UNESCO chair here. We are sometimes bureaucratic and slow, but one of our strengths is we are very transparent. So they have a transparent platform available that they can work through us and with us. And again, every single UN agency and the UN as a whole, we believe we cannot achieve the SDGs without them.